There's a particular kind of silence that fills the room when someone asks if you're over them yet. You smile, you nod, you say all the right things about moving forward and being grateful for the lessons. But late at night, when the world goes quiet and your defenses come down, their name still sits in your chest like a stone you can't swallow and can't spit out. You've tried everything. You've thrown yourself into work, into new relationships, into becoming a different person entirely. And yet some part of you remains tethered to someone who was never truly yours to begin with. Carl Jung spent decades unraveling a mystery that most therapists completely misunderstand. He discovered that when you love someone you cannot have, something happens to your psyche that goes far deeper than simple heartbreak or unresolved attachment. What Jung found challenges everything our culture teaches us about closure, moving on, and letting go. According to his research into the deepest layers of human consciousness, loving someone impossible doesn't just break your heart. It fundamentally reconstructs your soul's capacity for connection, depth, and authentic relating in ways that most people will never experience. Most psychologists will tell you that holding on to impossible love is a sign of emotional immaturity, an inability to accept reality, perhaps even a trauma response that needs healing. But Jung discovered something radically different. He found that people who experience this specific pattern of enduring, impossible love often possess what he called psychological sophistication that marks them as operating at frequencies most humans never access. This isn't about being stuck. This isn't about refusing to move forward. This is about your soul having been touched by something so profound that ordinary relationship rules simply don't apply anymore. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. That person whose memory doesn't fade with time but somehow grows clearer, more present, more real even as years pass without contact. The one who taught you what depth feels like, what true recognition means, what it's like to be seen by someone in ways that made you feel both terrifyingly exposed and profoundly safe simultaneously. And here's what makes this experience so confusing. You've probably loved other people. Maybe you're even in a relationship right now. But something about this impossible love carved channels in your psyche that nothing else has been able to fill or replace. Jung discovered that this isn't happening because you're broken or emotionally damaged. It's happening because you accessed a level of psychological and spiritual connection that operates beyond the ego's need for resolution and possession. Your soul recognized something in this person that your rational mind still can't fully articulate. And that recognition changed the very architecture of how you experience love itself. The question isn't whether you'll ever forget them. The question is whether you understand what their presence in your life was actually preparing you for. If you've ever loved someone you couldn't have and felt like that experience changed something fundamental about who you are, I want you to share just one word in the comments. Changed. Because what I'm about to reveal about Jung's research will completely transform how you understand why this person still lives in your heart, and why that might be the most important thing that's ever happened to your soul's evolution. Jung made a discovery that will shatter everything you believed about why certain people haunt us long after they've gone. He found that the human psyche contains what he called archetypal attraction patterns, psychological mechanisms that recognize soul-level compatibility in ways that transcend logic, timing, or circumstance. When you encountered that person you couldn't have, something ancient within you woke up. Not your ego, not your conscious desires, but something far older and wiser that exists in what Jung termed the collective unconscious. Think back to the first moment you met them. There was probably something you couldn't quite name, a quality of recognition that felt both brand new and strangely familiar, as if you were remembering someone you'd never actually met before. Jung would have told you that this sensation wasn't romantic fantasy. It was your unconscious mind detecting psychological frequencies that matched patterns buried deep in your own undeveloped potential. Your soul wasn't just attracted to who they were. Your soul was recognizing who you were meant to become. This is why conventional relationship advice fails people like you so catastrophically. Therapists tell you to make lists of their flaws, to remember the bad times, to focus on incompatibilities and reasons it wouldn't have worked. But none of that touches the real source of the connection, because the connection was never primarily about personality traits or practical compatibility. It was about archetypal recognition, about your psyche encountering a living symbol of your own unlived possibilities. Jung documented hundreds of cases where impossible love preceded massive psychological transformation. He noticed that the people who experienced this pattern weren't just romantically unlucky. They were individuals whose souls were enrolled in what he called advanced curriculum for consciousness development. Your impossible love wasn't random. It was precisely orchestrated by your own unconscious mind to crack open psychological defenses that had been keeping you safe but small, comfortable but incomplete. Here's what Jung understood that changes everything. The intensity you felt with this person, the depth of recognition, the sense that they saw parts of you that you'd never shown anyone, all of this was real. But it wasn't primarily about them as an individual. It was about your soul using their presence as a catalyst to activate dormant aspects of your own personality that were ready to emerge. The qualities you loved most in them, their emotional depth, their authenticity, their way of seeing beauty in ordinary moments, their courage to be different, these were mirrors reflecting your own potential back to you. This explains why you can't simply replace them with someone else who has similar qualities. It explains why new relationships, even good ones, feel somehow hollow compared to what you experienced with this impossible person. You're not comparing two people. You're comparing the intensity of your own awakening to the ordinariness of your usual consciousness. That person didn't just love you. They unlocked doors in your psyche that you didn't even know existed, and walking through those doors changed the entire landscape of who you are and what you're capable of feeling. But Jung discovered something even more profound about why loving someone impossible changes you forever. He found that these experiences force you to develop what he called psychological sovereignty, an emotional independence that most people never achieve because they never have to. When you love someone who can't love you back, at least not in the ways you need, you're confronted with a devastating truth. Love doesn't guarantee reciprocation. Depth doesn't ensure availability. Profound recognition doesn't automatically translate into relationship. This realization destroys the fundamental bargain most people make with love. They believe that if they love well enough, authentically enough, deeply enough, they'll be loved in return. They operate from an unconscious assumption that the universe is fair, that depth deserves depth, that recognition should be mutual. But your impossible love shattered that illusion completely. You discovered that you could offer someone the purest, most authentic love you'd ever felt. And it still wouldn't be enough to overcome circumstance, timing, their own limitations, or the complexity of human life. Most people experience this as trauma, as evidence that something is wrong with them or with love itself. They build walls, they become cynical. They decide that vulnerability is dangerous and depth is foolish. But Jung observed that a rare subset of individuals respond completely differently. Instead of closing down, they break open. Instead of becoming guarded, they become more authentic. Instead of loving less, they learn to love more purely precisely because reciprocation is no longer the point. This is the gift hidden inside the wound. Loving someone impossible forces you to discover whether you can generate love independent of receiving it. It reveals whether your affection is conditional on being wanted, or whether it can exist as a pure expression of your own nature. Jung called this the development of the inner beloved, a psychological achievement where you learn to access love as an internal resource rather than something you need to extract from external sources. Think about how this has changed your relationship with love itself. Before this person, you probably loved in order to be loved back. You were generous in order to receive generosity. You were vulnerable in order to create intimacy that would benefit you. But loving someone impossible stripped away all those transactional elements. You learned to love for the sake of loving, to care without controlling, to appreciate without possessing. This is the kind of unconditional positive regard that spiritual teachers spend decades trying to cultivate, and you developed it through the brutal simplicity of loving someone who couldn't be yours. Jung found that people who develop this psychological sovereignty become magnetic in ways they never were before. They enter new relationships from fullness rather than emptiness. They offer love instead of seeking it. They can appreciate others deeply without needing those others to complete missing pieces in themselves. The impossible love that broke your heart open also taught you that you were never actually broken. You were always whole, just waiting for an experience powerful enough to prove it. Now, Jung identified something that most people experiencing impossible love never recognize until years later. He discovered that the pain of loving someone you cannot have serves a specific alchemical function in your psychological development. Jung was fascinated by medieval alchemy, not for its literal goal of turning lead into gold, but for its symbolic representation of psychological transformation. He believed that certain emotional experiences, particularly impossible love, follow the exact same stages as alchemical processes, transforming the raw lead of suffering into the refined gold of spiritual wisdom. The first stage Jung called the nigredo, the blackening. This is the stage you probably remember most vividly. The dark nights when you couldn't sleep because your mind kept replaying every conversation, every moment of connection, searching for what you did wrong or what you could have done differently. This darkness feels unbearable because it strips away all your psychological defenses. You can't rationalize the pain away. You can't fix it or control it or make it mean something comfortable. You're forced to sit in the raw reality that love doesn't always work out, that depth doesn't guarantee duration, that sometimes the most profound connections exist in spaces between what is and what could have been. Most people try to escape this stage as quickly as possible. They distract themselves, they numb out, they jump into new relationships, they convince themselves they never really loved that person anyway. But Jung discovered that trying to skip the nigredo only prolongs it. The darkness has to be fully entered, fully felt, fully acknowledged before transformation can occur. Your soul needed to be broken down, dissolved, reduced to its essential elements. Every illusion you held about how love works, every fantasy you carried about guarantees and fairness, every belief that being a good person meant you deserved reciprocated love, all of this had to die. The second stage is what Jung termed the albedo, the whitening. This is when clarity begins emerging from confusion. You start recognizing that your impossible love was teaching you something far more valuable than relationship skills. It was teaching you about your own capacity for depth, authenticity, and unconditional appreciation. You begin seeing that the person you couldn't have was serving as a mirror, reflecting aspects of your own potential that were ready to be developed. The pain starts shifting from something that's happening to you into something that's happening for you. And if you're honest with yourself, you're probably somewhere in this stage right now. You can feel something changing in how you hold this experience. The sharp edges of grief are softening into something more like sacred memory. You're beginning to understand that what you lost wasn't the relationship you wanted. What you lost was the version of yourself who believed love required possession, who thought depth demanded permanence, who assumed profound recognition automatically translated into partnership. Take a moment and ask yourself this question, and maybe share your answer in the comments if it resonates. What quality in that person you couldn't have are you now developing within yourself? The final stage Jung identified is the rubedo, the reddening, where integration completes the alchemical process. This is where the gold emerges from the fire. You carry forward everything your impossible love taught you about depth, recognition, and authentic connection. But you release attachment to how those qualities must manifest. You become someone who can love profoundly without losing yourself. You can recognize beauty without needing to capture it. You can appreciate depth without demanding ownership of it. Jung observed that people who reach this stage undergo a fundamental shift in their relationship operating system. They stop seeking completion through others and start creating connection from wholeness. They stop using relationships to fill internal voids and start offering relationship as an expression of internal fullness. The love they experienced with their impossible person becomes a template, not for finding someone identical, but for recognizing similar depths of authenticity and recognition when it appears in available forms. But here's where Jung's insight becomes revolutionary. He discovered that this alchemical transformation doesn't erase the impossible love from your psyche. It transforms its function. That person stops being someone you're trying to get over and becomes someone who permanently expanded your capacity for conscious relating. They remain in your heart, not as an open wound, but as a sacred teacher who showed you what you're capable of feeling, recognizing, and creating when you meet someone who can actually build something with you. Think about the last time you encountered genuine depth in another person. Maybe it was a new friend who asked questions that went beyond surface pleasantries. Maybe it was a potential partner who showed flashes of the authenticity you thought only your impossible love possessed. Notice how quickly you recognized it. Notice how immediately you knew you were in the presence of something real. That recognition speed, that capacity to perceive depth within moments, that's a direct gift from your impossible love. They calibrated your system to recognize what matters, and now you can't unsee it in others. Jung found that people who complete this alchemical process often become what he called unconscious healers in their communities. Others sense something different about them, a quality of presence that makes people feel safer being authentic. Friends start coming to them with their deepest struggles because they can feel that this is someone who understands complexity, who can hold paradox, who won't try to fix what needs to be felt. Your impossible love didn't just change you for you. It changed you in ways that will heal others through your simple presence in their lives. The person you couldn't have wasn't meant to be your forever partner. They were meant to be your psychological midwife, helping birth a version of yourself capable of the depth you were seeking. And the beautiful irony Jung discovered is this: once you complete this transformation, once you become the depth you were seeking, you naturally attract others who have done similar work. Your impossible love wasn't keeping you from finding real love. It was preparing you to recognize and create real love when someone capable of meeting you there finally appears. Jung made a startling observation about the timing of impossible love experiences. He found that they rarely occur when you're psychologically ready for them. They appear precisely when your soul is prepared for growth that your conscious mind isn't equipped to handle. This timing isn't cruel coincidence, it's cosmic precision. Your unconscious mind orchestrated an experience that would force you to develop capacities you didn't even know you needed. Look at who you were before this person entered your life. You were probably playing it safe in some fundamental way. Maybe you were hiding your depth because you'd learned that most people found it overwhelming. Maybe you were dimming your intensity because past partners had told you that you felt too much, wanted too much, needed too much. Maybe you'd convinced yourself that practical compatibility mattered more than soul recognition, that comfort was more important than electricity, that a good person on paper was better than someone who made you feel fully alive. Then this person appeared and destroyed all those carefully constructed compromises. They saw through your defenses to the raw, authentic person underneath. They met your depth without flinching. They matched your intensity without asking you to tone it down. They recognized qualities in you that you'd been taught to hide, and their recognition gave you permission to finally be yourself without apology. For the first time in your life, you experienced what it felt like to be fully seen and genuinely appreciated for exactly who you are. Jung understood that this experience was necessary even though it couldn't last. You needed proof that your authentic self was lovable. You needed evidence that your depth was valuable. You needed confirmation that someone could meet you at the levels where you actually live. Without this experience, you might have spent your entire life believing you were too much, too intense, too deep for anyone to really want. Your impossible love gave you the most important gift possible. They showed you that you weren't the problem. You were just with the wrong people. But here's the shadow side Jung identified that most people never see. Some individuals become so addicted to the intensity of that recognition that they unconsciously avoid available relationships because nothing feels as electric as the impossible love. They start believing that real love only exists in impossible circumstances. That depth requires unavailability, that the moment someone is actually available, they must be somehow less than the person who couldn't stay. Jung warned that this pattern can trap you in cycles of perpetual longing, where you're always seeking the high of impossible recognition while dismissing anyone who could actually build something real with you. The alchemical transformation only completes when you can take the recognition capacity you developed through impossible love and apply it to creating possible love with someone available. So here's the question Jung would ask you, and I invite you to sit with this honestly. Maybe even share your reflection in the comments. Are you using your impossible love as a standard to recognize depth in available people? Or are you using it as an excuse to avoid the vulnerability required for real intimacy with someone who could actually choose you every day? Jung discovered something profound about the people who successfully integrate impossible love experiences. He found that they develop what he called transpersonal love capacity, the psychological ability to love in ways that transcend personal need and ego gratification. This isn't detachment or emotional numbness. This is love evolved beyond the possessive, controlling patterns that most people mistake for genuine affection. When you loved that impossible person, you were forced to learn something most people never discover. You learned that loving someone and being with someone are not the same thing. You learned that you could care deeply about someone's well-being, celebrate their happiness, wish them the absolute best life has to offer, even when their happiness had nothing to do with you, even when their best life didn't include you. This is extraordinarily rare. Most people's love is so conditional, so tied to reciprocation and personal benefit, that they literally cannot conceive of caring about someone who doesn't serve their emotional needs. Jung observed that this capacity for transpersonal love fundamentally changes how you show up in all your relationships. You stop trying to control people into loving you the way you want to be loved. You stop manipulating situations to keep people close out of your own fear of abandonment. You stop performing versions of yourself designed to make others stay. Instead, you learn to love people's authentic paths, even when those paths lead away from you. You learn to appreciate people's true nature, even when that nature isn't compatible with yours. You learn to honor what serves others' growth, even when it means releasing your attachment to specific outcomes. This doesn't mean you accept breadcrumbs or stay in situations that harm you. It means you develop the emotional sophistication to distinguish between loving someone and needing to be in relationship with them. You can hold profound appreciation for who someone is while accepting that circumstances, timing, or incompatibilities make partnership impossible. You can feel deep connection while honoring that not every connection is meant to become a relationship. Jung found that people who master this distinction become incredibly attractive to emotionally mature partners. They carry a quality of freedom that draws others in. People feel safe around them because there's no grasping, no neediness, no unconscious manipulation. They love from overflow rather than desperation. They offer presence as a gift rather than using it as a transaction to get their needs met. But perhaps most importantly, Jung discovered that developing transpersonal love capacity prepares you for what he called conscious partnership, relationships that serve both people's evolution rather than just meeting their emotional needs. You're no longer seeking someone to complete you or heal your wounds or make you feel worthy. You're seeking someone to grow alongside, someone who can meet you in the depths your impossible love taught you to inhabit, someone who wants to build something real while maintaining the freedom and authenticity that make love sacred rather than suffocating. The person you couldn't have taught you how to love without imprisoning. They showed you that the deepest love creates freedom rather than bondage, expansion rather than contraction, growth rather than stagnation. And now you carry that knowledge into every relationship you enter, transforming not just your own capacity for love, but raising the standard for what partnership can become. Jung's final insight about impossible love concerns its ultimate purpose in your soul's journey. He discovered that these experiences aren't just about the specific person, or even about learning to love differently. They're about initiation into a completely different way of being human, where you learn to find wholeness independent of external circumstances, while simultaneously remaining capable of profound connection. The person you couldn't have was never meant to be your destination. They were meant to be your catalyst for discovering that you don't need anyone to complete you because you were always complete. The longing you felt for them, that ache that seemed unbearable, was actually your soul longing for itself, calling you back to your own depths, demanding that you stop abandoning yourself in search of external validation. Every moment you spent wishing they were yours was a moment your soul was asking you to become yours. Every time you imagined a life with them was your psyche showing you possibilities for who you could become. Every quality you loved in them was a mirror reflecting your own undeveloped potential. The transformation that loving them initiated wasn't about becoming someone they would want. It was about becoming someone you could finally recognize as yourself. Jung observed that people who understand this shift from seeking to becoming often experience what he called psychological liberation. They stop waiting for life to happen through relationship and start creating lives so full, so rich, so aligned with their authentic nature that relationship becomes something they add to completeness rather than something they need for completion. And paradoxically, This is when the right people start appearing, not because the universe rewards personal growth, but because whole people naturally attract other whole people. The impossible love that changed you forever wasn't changing you for them. It was changing you for you, and for whoever comes next with the capacity to meet you in the depths where you now live. You're not the same person who fell in love with someone impossible. You're deeper, wiser, more authentic, more capable of real intimacy, because you've learned that intimacy begins with yourself. If this exploration of Jung's insights has helped you see your impossible love as a sacred teacher, rather than a romantic failure, I would be deeply honored if you'd share in the comments what this experience taught you about yourself. Not about them, but about you. What did loving someone impossible reveal about your own capacity for depth, authenticity, and transformation? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to make sense of their own journey. And if this journey into understanding the deeper purpose of impossible love resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe so we can continue exploring the profound psychology of human connection together. Share this with someone who needs to know that their impossible love wasn't a mistake, but a masterclass in becoming fully human. Thank you for trusting me with your time, and for having the courage to look honestly at experiences that shape us in ways we often don't understand until years later. Your willingness to explore these depths makes you part of humanity's evolution toward more conscious, authentic ways of loving.